4, please, on the podcast from Charlotte, North Carolina, Joe Pompliano. That's coming up on Eyes on Golf right now. Joe Pomp, talking all things sports biz with golf and the Masters. Joe Pompliano is an entrepreneur, investor, host of the Joe Pomp Show, author of the Huddle Up newsletter. Maybe you've seen him. I know every time I log on to social media right now, I feel like I'm seeing a clip of you on CNBC or something like that. There's a lot of places that people would find you. Joe, what did I miss there?
No, that was perfect. Thank you. I don't know why those guys at CNBC keep having me on. I can't imagine that the ratings are going up with me on the television, but they keep asking, so I keep doing it.
Well, I think I have an idea because for people that maybe aren't as familiar with you, you are a force on the internet, a force in the Twitter and Instagram sphere. You've built. I admire the following. I know how hard it can be to build an audience and cultivate an audience, and by that I say I haven't necessarily cultivated an audience like you, but I understand, the immense work that goes into that. And I wanted to talk to you today because you cover so much in the world of sports business. It's Masters Week. I see the golf stuff that you're getting out a lot of. You're firing golf tweets. I don't think we get as much golf talk as I want from you. So that's why I really wanted to have you on. But before that, for those who might not know your story, in the quick version of it, Joe, how did you create the career that you have right now?
Yeah, and don't sell yourself short, man. I follow a lot of your stuff too, and it's fantastic. So I'm
I
glad we were able to
appreciate
do
that.
this. But it's an interesting story. You know, I grew up like everyone else, loving sports. I have 4 brothers. I played everything you could imagine. I always joke like the typical things: basketball, football, baseball. But then we had a ping pong table. You know, we had air hockey. Like I was playing basically everything. And when you have 5 sons, my parents basically just threw us in the basement and were like, stay down there, right? And so I played everything growing up. I thought I wanted to be a professional athlete, quickly realized that wasn't possible. Transition, thought I wanted to be a sports agent, realized that that's a really tough business to get into as well. So I ended up finding my way into finance. I was working at a large bank in New York City. I did that for a number of years till my late 20s. And I really just had an itch to get back into sports. So with the internet today, I mean, it's easier than ever for these opportunities to kind of just be created by the people that are interested in them. So I literally just started tweeting and writing a newsletter and recording a podcast. And it went better than expected. I was able to leave my job and now I do this full time. Part of this is investing. So when I was at the bank, I was doing quite a bit of investing on the side. And I thought to myself that it would be a great opportunity to build an audience, which would give me leverage in that as well. And then talk about the things that I like to talk about. So it's been a fun, I guess now like 3 or 4 years probably at this point. But it's a different type of work, given that sports are nights and weekends versus finance, which is long hours, but mostly during the day.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but before I was thinking it's almost like the Pompliano brothers are like the Baldwin brothers of business reporting, or business and investing in general. You guys are out there and you've definitely taken that sports avenue. When someone asks you, what do you do? Maybe who doesn't know you as well, maybe a family friend, an aunt and uncle, what do you tell them?
I say exactly that to keep it simple. Entrepreneur and investor. I own essentially what amounts to like a new age media company, right? We do podcasts and newsletters and social media content. We work with brands to monetize it, and we also have a subscription service on the newsletter. And it's a mix of different things, and no day is the same. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's been a lot of fun.
This is a golf podcast, so I want to stick to golf.
Yep.
You've gotten into sports deeply. You cover the pulse of sports. Where does golf fit in? I'm too invested in the sport. I want to hear from you, as someone who can see a bird's eye view of sports. What is golf's footprint right now in the overall sports landscape?
I think golf is at a really unique time because golf has seen a surge in popularity recreationally over the last few years. If you want to even just take like Top Golf and all of that out of it, we all know
Mhm.
kind of what that's done to the golf landscape. But even just on course golf with COVID and everything else, more people are playing golf than ever before. And traditionally, you would assume that that would translate really well to the professional level because if you play golf, Maybe you want to go watch professional golfers and
Mhm.
see how much better they are than you and follow the tour and everything else. Obviously, that coincided with disruption of the professional level with the PGA Tour and Live. So it's been unique to see this surge in popularity at kind of like the recreational level, me and you. And it maybe doesn't translate as well to the professional level because I think some of the hardcore golf fans or fans that have been there every year showing up watching tournaments maybe might not be as interested now as they were previously, given something, some of the disjointedness that we've seen over the last few
Mhm.
years.
Yeah, and I think that's the $1 million question right now in golf. I always, if this is your first time on this podcast, I always preface with I'm an independent contractor for the PGA Tour. So if you want to shut me off and not hear what I have to say, go right ahead. That's why I have people like Joe on to give me a much more objective point of view. But I think that's the big crossroads that golf has asked itself about because during the height of COVID, that 2020 to 2021 time, playing golf was way up. It was a sport that people could play in a socially distanced world. On top of that, golf was one of the first sports to come back professionally, and it really was the first time Tiger Woods. That was a little bit before his car accident that happened around February 2021,
Yep.
but golf coming back, getting into the fold, sports betting rising, stars outside of Tiger Woods being developed. There was this critical time before Live Golf developed, and maybe part of the reason why Live Golf did develop, that was hitting this crossroads of, will the professional game align with the amateur game? And now that we have some data over the last few years and we have Live Golf involved, how has all of that changed over the last 3 to 4 years?
So the live situation is really interesting to me. And I mean, we could record 5 podcasts on just
Hmm.
this divide alone.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get like too into the weeds, but I think that fundamentally that there was a little bit of a problem and the professional players thought about it differently. And if you look at Saudi, golf isn't the only sport they're investing in. They've invested in basically every professional sport at this point, one or another. And golf was unique though in the aspect that there was an opportunity to compete with the professional tour. Same thing
Hmm.
applies with tennis, and I think at some point Saudi will probably try to do that as well, where these golfers, in some cases, are getting paid really well, but you really have to be within the top 50 or 100 to really get paid well. And then if you don't perform well, again, top 50 or top 100, you're not really getting paid at all. So there was this unique opportunity to come in and create this global tour similar to Formula One, which they are obviously very familiar with. And if you're able to get, 5 or 10 of the top 50 golfers in the world, which they have at this point, it sort of becomes serious, and they have to take it seriously. And we can argue about who did right, who didn't do right, and all of those type of things. There's certainly blame to be placed on both sides of organizations not moving quickly enough or not doing the right things to secure their future. But I'm actually probably more optimistic than other people when it comes to the future of golf because I've seen what's happening on the recreational level where the sport's growing tremendously. And if
Hmm.
they're able to find a way to get all of the best golfers playing in the same tournaments again, like the Masters this week, I think that ultimately we're going to see the sport grow. The PGA Tour has obviously gone out and secured investment from some of the best operators in sports. They own a bunch of different professional sports teams, and they've proven that they can build these assets from the ground up. So I think that's a great first step. And now it's about mending that relationship and finding a way to get the most popular players, the Brooks Koepkas of the world and people like that, back in the same tournaments on a more regular basis outside of the
Hmm.
majors than just the majors that we're seeing today.
I think that's also, and this is going to be a Masters podcast, so we're going to get into more Masters. But I do want to touch on because I know you have been really deep in covering Formula One, and I would say as the PIF invested in professional golf more in the United States than anywhere else, for American fans, maybe things were taken off guard in the last couple of years as opposed to the European contingent of fans that has seen Formula One investments, has seen obviously soccer has really revved up since Live Golf started, but has had saw the seeds of some soccer football investments, had seen the DP World Tour already playing an event in Saudi Arabia. As you look at especially Formula One, how have things mirrored the process that they've taken on maybe in the golf world?
Yeah, I think golf was really just another avenue, and it's helpful that it's
Hmm.
a global game, right? If you think about what they're trying to accomplish, they're trying to diversify away from oil and bring more money towards tourism. Sports is obviously a great avenue to use to do that, but it doesn't help if the competition has no relationship with your country. So I think what they've been doing is targeting more global sports like a Formula One, like a tennis, like a golf, like a boxing, where not only can they host events, but potentially like Live Golf, they could own the entire league. So there was an offer I know out to buy Formula One last year. I think it was like $20 billion. And Liberty Media said no, and they aren't going to sell. But those are the type of ideas that they want to accomplish because they have unlimited money and resources. And now they have the wherewithal and the appetite to go and build those assets. And I think that golf is just a perfect example of a sport that kind of fit the box of what they were trying to accomplish.
All right, let's talk about the Masters. And I know we know Yasser Al Romain would love a membership to Augusta National, but that's not what we're going to talk about. The Masters is such a unique brand in golf, and as all of this stuff goes on, it's one of those bulletproof brands that it feels like when push comes to shove, you see John Rahm's mentality and thought process and focus and Phil Mickelson and Brooks Koepka, the way they handle their business changes when they arrive on the grounds at Augusta National. And it's been a brand that, has not only gone back, almost 100 years now, but has continued to build up and has repositioned itself, I think, in the last 20 years or so in the industry. When it's Masters Week, when you see the green pop up, when you see Augusta National in the news, what comes to mind for you from a sports business perspective?
Exclusivity, control, prestige, like whatever word you want to use that
Mm-hmm.
replicates that, I think is what first comes to mind. If you think about the Masters, it's the only major that's played at the same venue. There's obviously a lot of history and tradition there, but there's also this feeling of like eliteness, right? Like it's like things are done a little bit differently. And I was tweeting about it this morning that they've really leaned into social media over the years and their
Mm-hmm.
content has really performed better. I mean, they have drones literally flying through Magnolia Lane and the clubhouse and the crow's nest and everything. And years ago, that would have been unimaginable. But I think it really speaks to the brand changing a little bit and certainly coming into the 21st century, but also maintaining that exclusivity, right? And you know this, and maybe some listeners know it as well.
Yep.
But the best example of this is probably the TV money, right? They literally give
Mm-hmm.
the rights away to ESPN and CBS on a 1-year handshake agreement under the guise of them controlling all of the exclusivity and the sponsorships and the commercials and everything else around the tournament. So there's certainly some level of like, we're too good for this. We don't need you. And I think ultimately that's a lot of the reason why people continue to tune in and watch every year.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, I think it's what, Rolex, Mercedes Benz, IBM, and maybe one more. I think there's only usually four actual sponsors of the Masters. You don't think about it. All of a sudden, you realize it when you watch the commercials, and they're the same commercials over
But
and over.
there's no signage on the course, and I think they only
Hmm.
get like 3 minutes every 60 minutes of
Yep.
commercial time, right? So you're watching basically every golf shot, which people complain about the broadcast every single week in golf. Not only can they not find it, but how many commercials are we going to show? And with the Masters specifically being on TV, but also the app, it's like a totally different experience than anything else in golf today.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm watching. We're taping this during the par three contest, so we can't listen. But I see Scotty Scheffler with an earphone in right now with some sort of headphone in. So he's doing something, which is obviously a new school mentality of the Masters. And I like what you said about maintaining the exclusivity, because I was showing my fiance yesterday the caddy bibs. Right, I said, look, Rory's caddy Harry's going to be wearing 89 this week, because Rory was the last player to arrive on the grounds at Augusta National. And she was saying, like, why do they do that? I'm like, it's just one of those things that they continue to carry on. We were talking about the Masters Champions Dinner. Well, why do they do that? Well, it's certain of these traditions. Why does the Masters defending champion pay for the meal? It's just something that has gone on forever. But I like what you said, because there is a feeling that I think the Masters has gone from, that we talk about exclusivity, but not exclusive in that it doesn't feel like you can't get to the Masters. It feels like a fan experience that is attainable. It feels like a brand that is attainable. It feels like getting the shirts is more attainable. And it feels like the Masters is appealing more now to the masses than it ever has before. I think that Fred Ridley coming in speaks to that. I think that he was able to say, hey, we're going to change things up. We're going to create the Augusta National Women's Amateur. We're going to reach the fans. We're going to send them the packages of food, right? We're going to send them. I ordered my dad for his birthday. I could get a portrait of one of the holes online. You can't buy merch, but you can do that. It feels like just a different mentality of connection with the Masters right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the bib thing, first and foremost, would drive me crazy. As someone with slight OCD, I'd probably be waiting in line to try to get my favorite number and like jockeying for position. So,
They do
uh,
that.
yeah, that would drive me crazy alone. But you're exactly right. It's like exclusive enough, but still attainable. Where the average sports fan, it's on their bucket list of virtually everyone I've ever talked to.
You've talked a lot in the past about the food prices. Everyone has talked about the food prices. Why does that still work?
I think it's all part of the experience, right? If you look at Augusta, they're still making a ton of money. They're going to
Mhm.
make about $150 million this week. Half of that is coming through merchandise sales alone, right? So that's obviously a
Wow.
big driver, but they could make significantly more money. Most estimates are around $100 to $150 million more in revenue they could make each year just by over monetizing the assets, right? The TV rights are obviously a huge one, but food's another big one. And tickets are another big one as well. I mean, most of the tickets are going out through auction now or lottery now, and they're
Mhm.
selling for a couple $100. Whereas if they just sold them for half the price that they're selling for on the secondary market, they'd be making tens of millions of dollars more too. So I think it's like this level. And Fred talked about it in the press conference today about how he's constantly asking himself, how can we open up more of it to people while still maintaining that tradition, that exclusivity, and everything else we just talked about? And I think concessions and ticket prices and everything else around that is still a huge part of that, right? They can make more money, but is it worth it relative to all the media exposure and everyone talking about the concessions every year and really enjoying themselves on the grounds when they get there? After, in most cases, they probably paid $1,000 or more to be there.
Yeah, and there's the US Open and the PGA Championship are probably two examples you can point to. The PGA Championship is on the same channel, the same two channels on ESPN and CBS, but sells a very different sort of package. Do you think that the Masters, I mean, if you were put in charge of the Masters, would you look at some of those other success stories and say, hey, we can make a couple extra bucks here, or do you think it's the opposite way that there are other organizations that should be looking for them to the Masters right now and saying, hey, if you reward your fans with certain opportunities, if you reward your fans with cheaper food, with certain options, you will get the reciprocation down the line that you need.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the Masters is looking at other places, quite frankly, and seeing what else they can do. And some of those other tournaments are looking at the Masters and doing the exact same thing. Now, it feels a little bit silly to leave out the fact that the Masters has a huge advantage here, which is that it's played at the same course every year. So
Mhm.
if you're, Pinehurst, who's going to be hosting the U.S. Open, you're trying to maximize revenue because the tournament's not going to be there every year. It's coming once and then it's done. So there's a few differences there that certainly play a role. But if you look at the Masters, it's already doing that a little bit. They're kind of building this like Disneyland for golfers that has even changed over the last decade versus what it was previously. And I'll give you an example. Everyone knows that they've been buying up real estate. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a bunch of real estate projects. They bought apartment complexes, shopping centers. They're trying to build potentially an exit off of the highway directly into the facility. They just announced today that they're going to be building a underground parking garage for the players and their families and other stuff like that. So they're certainly making a lot of changes and investing in the experience for not only the players but the fans as well. And I think the best example of this is people saw this week. Map and Flag. It's their next premium
Mhm.
hospitality offering that they're going to be opening this year. And it's $17,000, which sounds like an insane amount, but I'm sure some people will justify it in their mind of why it's a good deal. You get access to the tournament every day. You get free food, drinks. You get a personal merchandise shop, which hopefully the lines will be shorter than elsewhere. So it sounds awesome, but it's not even on the property, right? It's in a shopping
Yeah.
center that they bought for $26 million a few years ago. They renovated and then they built it. So this is one of those things now where they can say, we'll still leave concessions really cheap. We'll do the tickets through the lottery, but we'll be able to make some extra money here because they already sold out this year, and these people are paying $17,000 to essentially be off campus, off course, and experience a different type of hospitality offering than they've had in the past.
Yeah, and as someone who obviously spends a lot of time in New York around the USTA National Tennis Center, it's always fascinated me, these venues that do host, like you said, annual events, but spend the money for those. You never know what sort of weather you're going to get. You never know what's going to happen year to year. The Masters has obviously made that investment. I think your tweet after Map and Flag was private jets. So there are people that can afford a lot of the stuff going on. But I think also hospitality in sports has become bigger and bigger and bigger, and not necessarily in the most exclusive sort of way. I still think it feels attainable if you get the right ticket here and there, or some hospitality. If you go to an NBA or NHL game now, especially in arenas, there are different levels of hospitality right now, and the Masters seems to have really capitalized on that. Berkman's Place is the most famous before Map and Flag. What are there? Does it feel like a tier system in terms of how much people are spending and how much they're able to be a part of at the Masters? Obviously, you can sit anywhere essentially. For those who don't know, the people that set their chairs down, there's an unwritten rule at the Masters. If someone sets their chair down, they can leave, they can come back, they can kick you out, but there's no real assigned seating at the Masters.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a tier system. It's funny you mentioned that. I was actually in Miami last week and I was talking to Tom Garfinkel, who's the CEO of the Dolphins, Hard Rock Stadium, and he runs the Miami Grand Prix, the Formula One race. And he made a really interesting point, which seems obvious once I say it, but I'd never really thought about it in this capacity. And he talked about when he arrived at the Dolphins a decade ago. When he got to the stadium, there was really only like two types of tickets. It was regular seating or premium seating. And he thought to himself, like, to really maximize revenue here, we have to meet people in the middle somewhere and offer them a totally different experience by these tier structures. And now you see, there may be a club section, there may be a terrace section, there may be standing room only, there may be, the owner's suite. You may have tailgating only passes. So there's a few different things that stadiums have done really well. And I think Augusta is following that path, right? You can pay $100, $150 to get into the tournament through the lottery system. You can buy a ticket on the secondary market, which is sort of similar, but a little bit more expensive. You can go to Map and Flag or one of these other premium hospitality offerings. You can do practice rounds. You can do the whole tournament. You can do just the weekend. There's a bunch of different options now, which is, to your point, I think speaking to more fans and part of the reason why the tournament continues to become more popular really every year from an attendance perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Map and Flag is going to add to that sort of, okay, this is what I can work toward. And we'll see if it gets more people eventually in the doors at the Masters or, like you said, outside of the physical
I,
property.
I mean, $17,000 sounds crazy, right? You could go buy a pass online for the whole week and it would be cheaper than that. And, do you really want to eat food off the golf course? You can just eat it. There's a few different things to talk about to why it may not be worth it. But ultimately, the proof is in the pudding, right? They sold out of all the passes. They will continue to do that every single year. So there's obviously demand for it. And now it's just nurturing that and figuring out other ways to monetize the tournament outside of the things that make it so great, which is concessions, the control through the TV rights, the merchandise, all of that kind of stuff.
I'm starting to get the feeling, I talk to my friends sometimes and they say, "Look, I'd love to watch you more on air, but really I just watch the majors." And I get that. And I remember when Full Swing came out, my mentality was, I'm not saying this is going to make people die hard golf fans, but it might make some of those friends of mine who say they only watch the majors to be like, "You know what? Joel Damon's in fifth place going into the final round at the Texas Children's Houston Open." He wasn't, but let's say he was. Some people might tune in. But now I really think that the Masters is essentially among fans almost a tier of its own. That the other three majors um, are above the rest of the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, Live Golf events, but still not at the Masters level. Do you get that sense when it comes to the actual businesses and the TV ratings that the Masters is elevating itself above those other three majors?
Yeah, I think so. I think to some degree it might have already been there, and now it's just kind of
Mhm.
increasing that. But certainly, what's happened over the last few years with the divide in golf has made what we'll call, the regular season events just a little bit less important
Yeah.
than the majors, because the majors now have the ability to include all the world's best
Mhm.
players. In the Masters case, whether they qualify or not, because it's an invitational. So I think that's a piece of it. But then you just have to go back to the basics. I was talking to someone about this morning when we were discussing the women's basketball ratings, right? It's
Mhm.
Wednesday. Those came out yesterday. And it was announced that the women's tournament this year got 4 million more viewers than the men's. And they've essentially switched spots now. The men's tournament is nosediving and has become less popular, and the women's tournament has become more popular. And the reason I bring this up is because fundamentally, the viewership problem in sports comes down to two things. You need stars and you need storylines. The women's tournament had that better than anyone else this year, and certainly better than the men's tournament, because they really didn't have it at all. And there's a reason why that's happening in basketball. And the main reason is because in basketball, the men go pro after 1 to 2
Mhm.
years and they leave school. So you're constantly checking recruiting rankings, seeing who's coming in. You fall in love with them for a year, like a Zion, they leave and they're done with. In women's basketball, you have someone like Caitlin Clark, who's there for 4 years. She plays LSU last year in the national championship. She comes back this year, plays them in the Elite Eight. That's a star and a storyline. There's no reason to think that the viewership wouldn't be huge with that. Same thing happened in the Elite Eight when they played UConn. It was her. She wanted to go to UConn. They selected Paige instead. Great storyline, big stars, good game. Same thing with USC. So I think golf, traditionally has known that problem and done a really good job of that. But the Masters, above all the other tournaments, does a fantastic job with that. With the amount of history that's involved in the tournament, it allows them not only now to have the best players, whereas a regular season event wouldn't, but also the storylines are there because of all the history of the tournament as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because obviously the course is the same. You end up getting the players playing the same courses. You end up, playing the best players. Like take a Jordan Spieth who can putts around on every other golf course during the year and is going to show up at Augusta and compete every year. Phil Mickelson being one of the runner ups last year, into his 50s. So there's those opportunities. I think we saw, the Open Championship a couple of years ago when it was at St. Andrews. Courses matter so much, right? That Open Championship felt bigger and felt like it had some more gravitas than Open Championships elsewhere. And you talk about Pinehurst this year will probably have some more weight. A Pebble Beach US Open will probably have some more weight than LACC last year. So you're right that there's certain aspects that are unavoidable when it comes to course. I do want to talk about the TV ratings because you talk about the men's and women's basketball going different ways. Well, we look at the data. There's obvious data that on the PGA Tour side, the ratings are slightly down. And they're not necessarily going to Live Golf because Live Golf isn't even putting out the ratings right now on the CW. But then the Masters did have an increase of viewers last year, was up 19% year over year, averaged 12.06 million viewers. I believe that was in the final round last year. Scotty Scheffler won 2 years ago, was maybe a little too dominant in that round. You had the John Rahm Brooks Koepka duel last year that probably drove a lot of those ratings. But is there any correlation there between Masters ratings going up while other ratings in golf are going down right now?
Yeah, and I can speak to personal experience here. My father-in-law was visiting us a few weeks ago, and he's a huge golf fan, plays all the time, watches a ton of golf, and he said it was the least excited he's been for a season in a long period of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you look at some of the leaderboards, he didn't know some of these guys coming up. Some of the other players that he liked had gone to Live, and everyone knows the story, right? But what I think has happened now is to the point earlier that this has elevated the Masters because there's only 4 tournaments now that gets the best collection of players, and it's the majors. So it has elevated the Masters while lowering some of the other tournaments. And if you look at the players, for example, that was one of the best golf tournaments I've ever seen. I loved every single. I was glued to the TV the entire weekend. Sunday was phenomenal, right? It literally came down to the last putt with Wyndham Clark fist pumping only to realize he didn't make it. So it was a phenomenal TV product, but the ratings were still down, right? So like, how do you reverse some of that? And I think some of it comes back to what we said earlier about getting the game back together. And again, I don't want to dive too deep into this because some of the Live stuff is touch and go, and we don't really know what's going to happen. But I think that the PGA Tour's latest deal, the investment round that they did, was really smart because it enabled them to do one thing that I think is really important. And that one thing is now they're not beholden to do whatever Saudi wants, right? And earlier it was, okay, we're going to do this deal with Saudi. All these players were upset. You didn't tell us about this. We feel like we got the short end of the stick. These guys went, they made all this money. Now they're going to be able to come back and play. We could have done that, etc. Totally get all of that. So what they've been trying to figure out is how to make amends here and allow all these players back on the PGA Tour or a general tour where everyone's playing on the same thing in a fair and equitable way. And as part of the agreement last time, they gave out equity to some of the players, right? The top 50 guys are going to be making the lion's share of the equity, or top 40, whatever it was. And I think what that's going to do is it's going to secretly and quietly kind of create a fair way to allow a lot of these guys back on the tour that may not want to play on Live Golf anymore, right? And you can say, hey, it's not fair, but if you're Rory or Justin Thomas or any of these other top 10, top 20 guys, at least from a name stature, it's going to be fair to you because now you're going to receive potentially tens of millions of dollars in PGA Tour equity, whereas they're not going to receive any of it, right? And they're going to come back and you're going to have that. You're going to be able to see it grow. The other thing I think it did was it's going to lock some of these guys into the PGA Tour who might potentially have been convinced with some of this money later on to go to Live Golf. And what I mean by that is if you think about the PGA Tour from a startup mentality, startups traditionally will offer their earliest employees equity. This equity is then distributed over a number of years. It's locked up, right? And what that does is it keeps you with that company and it maintains your status with the company for a longer period of time. Otherwise, you don't get the equity. My guess is they're going to do the exact same thing with the PGA Tour, where these players have to stay on the PGA Tour. Otherwise, they're going to see tens of millions of dollars of phantom equity at this point disappear from their personal balance sheet, and they're not going to be able to invest that money or use that money or get paid that money. So I think, one, it's going to keep some of the PGA Tour players there, but two, it's also going to potentially allow some of these live golfers to rejoin the tour in some capacity into the future.
I think that's a concise way of putting it. We're talking. John Rahm said this week, right? He thought his own move would expedite the process. I look at it as this has been at the end of the day, the two are going to come together, and part of it is any negotiation in life, right? You look around and you have to do a song and dance. The biggest executives in the world don't just walk into one meeting, shake hands, have the deal. And unfortunately, a lot of this has been out in the open. I think the PGA Tour felt like they were in a position of power at the end of last year. Then the John Rahm move happened. All of a sudden, the PIF felt like they were in a position of power. Then the SSG investment comes in, and now I think, like you said, I think there's a breath from the PGA Tour side of it's basically a 5-year runway now of feeling like, okay, we have not necessarily gotten the higher ground in this negotiation, but we have a high ground,
Yeah, it's
and
all about
that
leverage. It's all about
yeah.
leverage, and that's exactly what the PGA Tour got through the latest investment.
Yes. So on top of that, so now there's also players, by the way, to your point, that the PGA Tour and golf fans, like I can't remember if it was your uncle or your grandfather that you were talking about, who would not care for. There are certain guys that the PGA Tour is fine not coming back, right? There are only a handful of names. So to the point about other players being upset, there's only going to be maybe 5 to 10 would be my estimate of guys that the PGA Tour is really saying, all right, please come back, as opposed to some of the other guys. But I want to put you in charge of the professional golf world. You're the mediator. You can do anything right now. You can build the future of professional golf, which a lot of people will speculate just kind of needs to be reorganized in a way. How are you organizing professional golf to maximize both revenue and maximize fan engagement?
It's a really difficult question, but I really do think it looks more like Formula One than not, right? That's a great example. I think there's some kind of world tour capacity to it where you're visiting different countries and kind of developing this global audience. I think, maybe 75 or 90%, if I had to put a number on it, of the events should still be in the US because, quite frankly, the US is the biggest sports market. It's going to make the most money for the investors that have now invested in fundraise for the PGA Tour. So I think that's going to be a big part of it always. And maybe it's mending some of the rules that have come out of Live and some of the things like the team stuff and other things into other events. So I get that. I just think that the PGA Tour's main focus now should be on getting the biggest names back in their competitions, given that they now have to answer to shareholders about how the tour is going to move forward. And to do that, you're going to have to give something to Live, right? Whether that's them just simply investing and, quite frankly, giving you money, or that's giving them some sort of team concept
Mm-hmm.
or bending the rules a little bit to allow Live some type of leverage over you. I think that's going to ultimately be the answer to this. And it just matters how long it takes. And I think every day, really, that it keeps going on, the game of professional golf is getting hurt by it.
Yeah, I haven't gotten the call yet about any equity. I'm still, maybe one day down the line. Now, put your fan hat on. As a fan, um, what do you want to see immediately? What do you want to see long term?
I want to see more good golf. I want to see the best
Hmm.
players competing against each other on great courses. I talked about the Players earlier. The Players was a fantastic tournament this year. The course was awesome. The field was awesome. The result was fantastic. We had literally down to the last hole. So that's the type of product that people need. And if you can deliver that on a consistent basis with good broadcasts, good sponsors, big prizes, things like that, that's ultimately what people are going to tune into. So we saw the Players, right? The viewership wasn't what we thought it would be, but it's because the PGA Tour isn't doing that every single week. So you're
Hmm.
getting people tuning in that maybe don't tune in every single week, but to consistently get that audience, you need to deliver that product every time that they hit the course. And I think getting the biggest players to consistently compete in the same tournaments is step one. Bringing in some different courses might be another step, but ultimately the TV product needs to improve as well. And the fan experience on site needs to improve too. I think Formula One does a fantastic job of that. If you go, I went to the race in Miami last year and the year before. I've been to Las Vegas, I've been to Monza and a few other ones as well. And the thing that you notice at these races is that it's like a music festival, right? The race is certainly part of it, but people are there all weekend long, and there's a million different things to do around the event rather than just watching the race cars. And golf is similar in the fact of like, you're able to see a little bit more, certainly, because people are in all these different holes and you can follow golfers and go to different holes. But in Formula One, you only see the car for a few seconds when it passes you.
Hmm.
Going to a race is actually a terrible viewership option. You'd much rather be at home watching it on TV. So, what Formula One has done is they figured out all these other avenues to still consistently get hundreds of thousands of people to attend these races. And what they've done is that they've created these atmospheres that are like festivals where there's food trucks, there's concerts, there's all these different options from ticket. Like Miami's a great example because you can sit on a yacht, you can sit in the grandstands, you can sit in the paddock club, you can listen to a DJ, you can just get a pass for $50 and walk around. There's so many different options for fans. And I think fans really enjoy the aspect of that, of where it's really like a party rather than a sporting event.
Yeah, I think Live Golf has definitely tried that.
Yeah, but
Um,
they don't, I've been to a couple live golf events. I think they're, kind of sort of in that direction, I would say, but they're also different. And I would argue, don't really look much like what I described there.
Well, I think that where I take it is that like when they have an Akon concert and get people to come to watch Akon, those people are not watching. They're not becoming golf fans. They're not watching any of the golf. I
Yeah.
think that it's marrying the two. And like you said, I think there's a way to make every time the PGA Tour or professional golf is coming to your city, make that a week long event as opposed to just something that's on Saturday and Sunday. How do you engage fans? And you see it right, it's kind of NBA All-Star weekend every week on the
Yep.
PGA Tour is how you can do it. And obviously, the major championships have that ability to do it to the highest level. You mentioned Caitlin Clark. I want to talk about her and maybe a connection to golf because obviously women's golf um, is in a interesting moment right now where Nelly Court has won 4 straight times on the LPGA Tour. They haven't gotten to the major season. The LPGA Tour definitely has its hardcore fan base. It continues to try to grow. And I think that women's sports, in a lot of ways, is seeing what Serena Williams did for tennis, seeing what Caitlin Clark did for women's college basketball right now. I think men's golf can take a lot from what Scotty Scheffler is doing right now in terms of building that one individual. But then on the Formula One side, Max Verstappen is almost too good right now that's hurting Formula One. What notes can both men's and women's golf take from Caitlin Clark?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier around stars and storylines. And stars are the most important part of that equation because people tune in to watch other people. Caitlin Clark's a great example of this. The viewership rocketed this year or went through the roof because of Caitlin Clark specifically. We could talk about South Carolina being undefeated. We could talk about LSU and Angel Reese. We could talk about all those other teams that they played. But the one common thread through all of that was Caitlin Clark in Iowa. And I think that's ultimately why we saw such a big number in the national championship game. So same thing applies to women's golf and men's golf. And Formula One, quite frankly, is you have to have stars. And I think Drive to Survive did a fantastic job of that. And Full Swing is doing that to some degree as well. And then it's all about developing the storylines, right? So Formula One has now been trying to pitch this storyline of Max Verstappen's one of the most dominant drivers of all time, and Red Bull's got the best engineers, and what they're doing is absolutely tremendous because no one's ever done it before. And that's interesting, but it's probably not the most interesting
Mm-hmm.
storyline. I'd rather the storyline of what happened with Iowa and South Carolina in the national championship, for example. South Carolina won every single game last year and this year, but one. The
Yep.
one loss came to Iowa in the Final Four last year. They lost all 5 of their starters during the offseason, completely new starting 5. They went undefeated this year and faced them in the national championship. Now, the idea that you can say, hey, look, we have Caitlin Clark on one side, and this other side is an undefeated team whose only loss over the last 2 years came to that person. That's that's the best storyline you could possibly imagine. So it's how do you create those same storylines in golf? Scheffler's another good example. Can he win another Masters? He's obviously been on fire this year.
Mhm.
Is he now going to turn into like a Tiger-like run that we had seen previously? Same thing with women's golf. How do you develop these storylines outside of just the tournaments themselves around the stars that are competing in those tournaments? I think that ultimately is the answer of how you increase viewership, how you get more people to attend the events, and how you get more interest in the sport overall.
Yeah, I think there's a Nelly Corda potential for a full swing episode if they can swing that I truly think just introducing fans more to her story. Obviously, she has an incredible story. Her sister has played professional golf. Her brother is a top ranked player on the ATP tour. Her father was a top tennis player of all time during his era. So there's a lot of potential there. Just back to the Masters real quick. I want to know what can the world of sports take away from the Masters, not just other golf tournaments, because we're kind of saying that no one else can be the Masters, but what can other events in the sports world take away from what we're about to witness at Augusta this week?
I think the Masters ultimately has done one thing really well, and it's delaying gratification for more in the long run, right? And we just talked about it. If you think about the Masters, they control everything, and in a lot of ways, giving up 100 to 150 million dollars a year would be a death sentence for most people in professional sports. Certainly, venues, executives, people like that, who are constantly trying to maximize revenue from every possible thing they can because of how lucrative sports franchises, leagues, and events can be. But the Masters has taken the opposite approach. And they said, hey, look, we know this is going to be here every year. We're going to invest in our future. And mostly we're going to invest in the fan experience. We're going to make it cheaper for people to attend when they're on site because it's going to be enjoyable. You may pay more for the ticket, but if you buy it through us, it's going to be cheap. You're going to be able to come to the event. You're going to have a great time. The experience is going to be fantastic. You're going to put your phone away. You're going to actually enjoy it.
Mm.
And you're going to go home and tell everyone about it. And they know that they can only experience that by coming here and seeing it for themselves. So again, they give up all of this money on the front end, knowing that it builds the tournament up and the allure of the tournament up in the long end for them to become now the premier golf tournament for sure, but one of the premier sporting events in the world.
Joe, anything else golf related while I have the microphone in front of you right now?
Who's your pick to win this week?
Yeah, usually I have to be objective, right? Because I'm on air. I know it's a popular pick, but I'm gonna go with Xander Schauffele. I think that people are missing that. There's all the talk about Xander can't get it done, can't get it done. I think that Xander is trending so hard right now, and just because he doesn't have a one next to his name this year in terms of winning, I think people are overlooking that. But I think it's basically Xander, Scotty, and Wyndham. We can get into a whole debate on if is John Rahm ready. I tweeted it out this week. He's played 15 competitive rounds this year. He had played 28 at this point last season. So you know, I'm not saying that he won't mentally be there, but you can't argue with the actual play that he's had. Who's your pick, Joe?
I like Xander. So I do a pool every year for all the majors. You basically just pick four golfers. If they make the cut, you move on. Then it's the lowest score of who's left. And I usually do like two or three teams in the pool. I have Scotty on basically all of the teams, which is I think a safe pick because I imagine
It's
he's
the
gonna.
Yukon pick.
Yeah, if he doesn't, I picked UConn to win the tournament too, which was the easy pick, but ended up working out. But I think Scotty, like if you look at Scotty, if he doesn't win, he'll probably finish in the top 10.
Mhm.
The only thing that makes me a little bit nervous is his wife being pregnant and potentially leaving the tournament. That would not be good for me. But I agree with most of the other picks. I have Xander on one of the teams for sure. I think the same thing, right? Even if he finishes second, that's a fantastic outcome, and specifically for the competition that I'm in. I think with the live guys, it's interesting because like John Rahm for sure, Brooks, I think even more, we're going to get a sense of how well these guys can just turn it on because a lot of them aren't really turning it on for the live events. You know, you hear
Mhm.
John and he's like, oh, I feel just as much pressure, if not even more, because it's a team competition. I still want to win. I like to compete, but it's different, right? And I
Yeah.
think if they really have the ability to turn it on, we're going to find out at the Masters because last year, I forget the number, but there was a bunch of live guys that were kind of right up there. Phil, Reed, a bunch of other guys
Yeah.
too.
Brooks.
And yeah, Brooks. And that's really what we're going to have to find out is like, can these guys really just turn it on? Like, how much does it matter that you're
Mhm.
playing several events leading up to it? You're playing really good golf and you're in a groove and you come to Augusta. Can Brooks show up and compete to win a major like he has done in the past without playing really good golf beforehand? I think that's probably one of the more interesting storylines this year.
Brooks has done that before, and I know last year it is worth noting he won the Live Orlando event the week before the Masters, and this year he was 7 over in Miami, so a little bit of different form, but to me it's like you said, Brooks has done it before. John Rahm has never played this little competitive golf before playing in a Masters. So to me, you see Rory hustling to play more golf right now. It is you can do whatever you want, but John Rahm physically has not had the golf out there to
I just
play.
the part where I hold out hope though is that this is their Super Bowl, right? Like
Mhm.
no, let's be honest. No one's really watching them outside of this, at least not the average
Yeah,
golf fan or the average sports fan for sure.
yeah.
So this is their time to come in like Brooks did last year and either compete at a major like this or win another major. And those are the tournaments that they're really going to get juiced up for. So can we blame it on what's happened, at recent tournaments? Have they been preparing for this tournament? Are they even mentally checked into those other tournaments? I don't know. We're going to find out though how well they play. But everyone wants to play well, but I think there's a little bit of added motivation for some of those guys because they're not being watched every week, and everyone has said they've made the wrong choice and they're not playing well, and their tournaments aren't being watched. This tournament, more than anything else, I imagine they want to win. Even though everyone wants to win it, I think it's just a little bit more probably for them.
And it helps that there are only 89 guys. So
Yeah.
it is a more
What's Brooks say? It's a
exclusive
math
tournament.
problem.
Yeah. I don't know how much I want to let Brooks do my math equations for me, but Brooks did say 59 is out there this week, which is essentially Bryson-esque from Brooks. But Joe Pompliano, really good, really glad we could do this. I mean, there was a little betting there at the end. We could probably do a whole other hour on golf betting and how that affects the industry right now. But you can listen to him on the Joe Pomp Show, and also please give a follow to his newsletter, Huddle Up, and give a follow. Be one of the hundreds of thousands of people following Joe Pompliano in the social media sphere. Joe, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks to Joe for making the time in his busy week to talk Masters, talk golf. Kind of got a little Caitlin Clark in there as well. A lot to talk about with him with Sports Biz. He is one of those truly great, can't miss follows out there. If you're into sports, if you're into sports biz, if you're into biz, him and his brothers, they do some awesome, awesome work. So again, that's Joe Pompliano. Give him a follow. Remember to follow and subscribe to Eyes on Golf. I'm Jeff Eisenband, and I will see you next time.